if everybody's comfortable with that. And then if you want to share it with some colleagues, okay. If you don't feel comfortable, let us know and we'll destroy it. But for a couple colleagues that couldn't make it, but we wanted to share it with them. So we'll send around a link if Ms. Gilbert is successful in saving the recording. Don't count on me for that, but then they can look at it themselves. And
Wonderful.
Thank you. So Zan.
Yes, so I'm Zan Weedle. I'm a senior research data engineer at the Institute for Policy and Social Research, and I also lead the Kansas State Data Center. So that's an official partnership with the Census Bureau.
Excellent. Thank you, Zan. Dr. Bruce.
Not doctor. My name is Josh Bruce. I work at the University of Oregon in the Institute for Policy Research and Engagement. I'm the Associate Director for Applied Research there, and also with Bob Parker, who's on the call today, co-manage our EDA University Center here in Oregon.
Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. And let me call out Dr. Parker in that regard then.
I'm also Mr. Parker, but
Okay.
I've been with the university for 30 some years now, and we've had our university center since 2009. And Rex was one of our reviewers in the early phases of the UC and provided good advice on this. I'm really excited about the direction that you're taking this. Josh and I have been looking at this particular call and didn't have any bright ideas, but this seems spot on to me.
Thanks, Bob. And I do recall our opportunity to visit out west. That was one of the wonderful programs that EDA did support, was the opportunity to do some peer review visits. I hope with some of the additional funding that they get, they'll renew that partnership. And with the pandemic maybe coming under control, we can actually have opportunities to visit face-to-face as colleagues as we move forward on our economic development work. Good to see you again. Dr. Meyer.
Wally Meyer. I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship Programs here at the University of Kansas. We've been at UC for, I don't know, Jenna, what, 12 years or something? I'm dating us now. In any event, thrilled to be part of this and very anxious to hear how donut economics fits into your thinking.
Thank you. Appreciate your joining us. Dr. Hurd.
Not a doctor either. So,
Sorry.
you know, I mean, the master's in urban planning is a terminal degree. So
right.
That's right. So I'm at the University of Kansas. I'm with the Institute for Policy and Social Research, and we've had a university center with the Center for Entrepreneurship for, around 12 years or so. But before that, we had a joint center with Kansas State University, and I was involved with that. So I've been involved with the university program for more than 30 years, maybe longer than you, Rex. So, and I did do a peer review for the Seattle region many years ago, but I don't think Oregon was involved at that time. I don't know if you had. But we've been doing this last round, I guess we've been doing some stuff. We have developed a data portal for our regional economic development organizations in conjunction with them, like what they said they wanted for their CEDS. And we launched that in 2014. Zan, we worked with them to find out what variables they wanted in it, and Zan then developed the portal. So we're very interested in that. That aspect of it.
Yep, thank you, Jenna. Yes, and several of our institutions, I know Purdue has done this as well, quite well actually, has developed data sets that are available to regions to draw down upon to help them with their CEDS and other economic development planning. And you know, the expertise that you've all already developed, I think can be extremely helpful to us as we think about expanding that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for joining us today. So Dr. Morgenthaler.
Hi, also not a doctor. I'm Heidi from the University of Rochester Ames Center for Entrepreneurship. We are relative newcomers to the University Center world compared to the rest of you, it sounds like. We were awarded our University Center grant in 2016. It actually just ended and we were not selected on our reapplication, but we do have a COVID-19 supplement grant that we're working on. And we also have regional partners as part of an EDA sprint grant. And we're applying for another EDA grant. So we're still very much interested in being involved in this space.
Thank you. Let's see, and I think the last colleague is Dr. Knapp.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm driving the car, so I'm sort of in and out. So I'm Garrett Knapp. I direct the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland, which has been the administrative home of the EDA Center for the last 10 years. The EDA Center, and just to hear where this initiative is going.
Thanks, Dr. Knapp. You are breaking up a little bit, but please hang with this as best you can and be careful on the road. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So any other issues on introduction, we can just jump right into it. Ms. Gilbert and I have organized a brief presentation that we think will orient you to what we're just thinking here, and then hopefully we'll have a good conversation about, is this something we'd want to do as a collective? Would we likely be successful if we undertook it, and what it might imply as far as what we would need to consider? So really just a beginning conversation. Anything anyone would like to say before we jump right into our presentation here? And let me say, if you have anything you want to ask or introduce, then just speak up. I trust you're all able to see the slide here, sort of the transforming economic development planning, trying to anticipate what the 21st century economic development planning might look like. Okay, so folks are able to see that. So how do I show next slide? Don't seem to be, there we go. So talk a little bit about what we're trying to do with this concept we're calling a CEDS plus, why we think a CEDS plus might matter in the 21st century context. A little bit of discussion about Rayworth's work in donut economics. Her work really serves as sort of a model for some of what we're thinking. It's not the book. I don't know if folks have had a chance to look at the book. Here's my, she's got a lot in there. We're really focused on the data modeling elements, so she has other aspects in the book worth reviewing. Talk about what a proposal might look like for a CEDS plus pilot, and then what our conversations have been with EDA thus far about where this might fit into their NOFA, their Notice of Funding Availability, and then what next steps we might agree to take after this conversation, and then any lingering questions or comments that you might have. And again, if something surfaces as we're discussing it, don't hesitate to raise that. Okay, so I think what we've been observing in the economic development planning world is that the current practices that are being used to help prioritize economic development actions don't fully incorporate some of the issues that are becoming more and more critical to our communities, including environmental quality and economic equity. And if we look at the CEDS historically, those types of discussions and data sets in most cases haven't been present. The elements of the environmental quality that a region might experience, challenges that it might have, and also when you think about the CEDS advisory committees that many of our districts work with, while they're broadly representative of local government, in some cases private sector leaders, they often don't represent environmental organizations or organizations representing poor and minority communities. And so again, the challenge that we're noting is that the kind of information that they're operating with through the data that they have available to them and the decision-making group that's identifying the priorities and policies that CEDS might articulate may not reflect those other stakeholders that might express issues related to economic equity or environmental quality. And so what we're thinking is that maybe we need to revisit the CEDS and try to help pilot a process that would incorporate those additional data sets, particularly the environmental and economic justice data sets, and help work with their advisory committees to understand those variables involving additional stakeholders, and then see as a result of that process, they come up with some additional different economic development priorities or actions that might value equally not only the economic vibrancy of the community, but also the environmental quality of the community and the environmental limits that the community may be facing, as well as issues related to economic justice and equity. So that's sort of the paradigm that we are observing and wanting to challenge a little bit with colleagues like yourselves who do this work and understand this work and help with this work. You know, can we think of a new way, a different way, an expanded way, CEDS plus, that would help communities incorporate a broader set of items within their economic development thinking? Now, so that we reached out to a few university centers that we thought had relationships with EDDs, the economic development districts, and or have had experience in data support for those organizations. And we, you're the group that responded to our call to say, hey, you want to try some of this and see if it works. So this is kind of what we're looking at here. So essentially, again, what I'm repeating this slide is that we think there needs to be an expanded CEDS database that reflects the economic variables, the traditional economic variables, the business clusters, the wages, the challenges that presents, but also some of the environmental parameters that a community might also face, and then some of the social justice challenges that they might face. And then work through that CEDS advisory committee, an expanded advisory committee, and see if we get different outcomes as a result of it. So that's essentially the experiment that we're suggesting that we might try. So just as our guiding principle that really puts this proposition out there, this is what Rayworth's work really brings to our attention, is that we're not fully incorporating these variables in our decision-making, and we're not likely to get outcomes that value those environmental and social characteristics of a community because they're not in the decision-making process to the extent they might fully be articulated there. So I'm going to stop because that's pretty much the concept right there. So maybe some of you have seen this diagram that Rayworth put together in her book. We're not, I want to mention, we're not married to the actual variables that obviously are in each of these categories. On the outside, she has the environmental ecological ceiling that we need to be conscious of that's necessary for certain systems in our environment to continue to operate efficiently. Within our social foundations and the elements that are in that. But these are, again, she draws our attention that if we're going to do successful, sustainable economic development planning and implementation in the 21st century, we need to take into account both of these, all of these sets of parameters to be successful. So I'm going to stop and listen and hear what y'all think about this.
So Rex, I want to make an observation and that builds off work that we've been doing with RUC. Josh and and our team have been really deeply engaged in economic resiliency work over the past about 5 years, and have done a pretty wide array of work, some of which has been, I think, effective, and other which is met with resistance or ambivalence. But this model seems to I would assert that the variables that you're talking about here are also an aspect of resilience that can be incorporated here, and resiliency is a required element of EDA CEDS at this point. So it feels like we might leverage off of that requirement a little bit here. The rest of this feels spot on. We have worked not with all of the districts. Oregon's got 12 districts, 11 that represent geographic areas, and one that represents the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon, and I can't remember how many in Washington. And it's been interesting to work with the various organizations. They have vastly differential levels of capacity and so on, and vastly different, I think, receptiveness to thinking more innovatively about how they approach the work. And I don't know if other states have, or other UCs have observed this, but in many of our regions, our economic development districts sort of struggle to get local governments and others to align with them unless they're looking at EDA funding, and that's been frustrating for us for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, they aren't the strongest horse in the stable. That's true, the EDDs. In many ways, a lot of economic development actions get taken and regions don't always get at the table. You're right, Bob, I agree. But they're certainly a part of our EDA University Center family. So, and on your point on resiliency, right on, and equity is also in their CEDS revised. And one of the things that we did as a way of, is this a relevant issue? We looked at our Southeast Michigan Council of Government CEDS. I don't know if any of you looked at CEDS lately. When we looked for issues related to any of these variables, and while they speak to issues of economic equity, they don't really have a plan of action for how that might be achieved. The word climate change didn't show up, and this is our 4 million people in Southeast Michigan, the home of the auto industry, doesn't want to talk about climate change. And when we asked our CEDS EDDs about that, they said, well, it's politically unpalatable. People just, well, sorry, you want Greta Thunberg to come and talk to you? Come on.
Yeah, Rex, that's also potentially out of step with literally what Ford just announced yesterday.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, so they're just they need to read the local newspaper. Let me just offer two thoughts. One is I think this is absolutely right on for the reasons that you've already provided as it relates to climate change. Something that we are increasingly building into our curriculum here at the business school at KU is this whole concept of ESG, environmental, social, and governmental. And this ties to that very well. I think that by doing so, you're actually ahead of the curve. And therefore, I would expect that most audiences would greet this kind of approach very favorably. I do have one question as it relates to what's your vision as to the deliverable? What's the outcome of the work here?
Good question. Well, I'll jump to the last slide. Oops. So the idea is that we would work together as a collective, because this is complicated and a lot of different moving pieces. And I see us as an intellectual collective that would devise a set of actions through mutual conversation and shared learning, where we would partner with targeted EDDs. So for example, we might agree, each of us might take on 2 economic development districts If we can, get them to agree to pilot this, help them create a CEDS plus with the data sets that include the additional variables that might be relevant, and then also help them with a larger CEDS advisory committee, help train and orient the new members and train and orient the old members on what are the implications of both a different data set plus also a broader advisory group. They would go through the process they go through in their CEDS work to identify policies and priorities for that region. And then we would summarize what we observed and found, and then report that back to EDA and say, as a result of incorporating these variables, incorporating a broader stakeholder network, here's the kind of priorities that came out, and then look at that in relation to other CEDS nationwide. And if we prove that this in fact does result in different economic development policies and priorities at the regional level that are more environmentally sustainable and socially just, advise EDA they need to change their CEDS such that they do this more broadly nationwide. So that's the nut of it. We conduct a pilot experiment as UCs in partnership with EDDs, trying to test it out. Does it make a difference? Does it work? And if it does, help EDA reform their CEDS so that it embraces these concepts. So Wally, that's kind of what we're thinking.
Potentially upgrades the EDA's model of the distribution of their available resources.
That's generally what CEDS are supposed to do, though I think Bob noted that sometimes EDA doesn't follow the CEDS. They'll go with whatever the deal is that's on the table at the time. But yes, that's essentially the concept of CEDS. It's supposed to guide the federal investments, and in some cases it does. So that's the basic concept. Walk through with our partners, try it, struggle with them as they learn more about these things and try to make decisions in a broader context, and then look at what we created and see if we got a different outcome. Other comments or reactions, folks? I mean, that's the...
Eric's one question I have is, are there particular types of districts we would be looking to partner with? And I could see if we put all districts on a continuum, right? They're going to be ones that are closer to drinking the Kool-Aid than others. And so are we actually looking to partner with districts that might be skeptical or actually potentially hostile to this approach versus ones that are maybe already on the path, so to speak? Do you have thoughts or ideas about that?
I do, Josh, and that's a really good question. I mean, it really depends on what you would want to do in your university center. I mean, there is some value in bringing the laggards into the experiment, because obviously we learn what are the impediments, what are the challenges. However, those are the projects that are likely to keep us up at night and make us all old and gray like I am now. We might want to pick the easy winners and have lots of success. And, but then again, we're picking, the winners, and, maybe that's not the true test. If we want to have a national impact, we're going to probably want to learn as a collective what the laggards say about this, and try to provide guidance to EDA on those EDDs where there's likely to be resistance. So from a research perspective, I think a diversity of the EDDs, both urban, rural, forward thinking, less forward thinking, easy to work with, less easy to work with would be a nice combination. However, I'm inclined to think you're all busy as you can be now. And, if we're successful and we take on this additional task, there's a lot to be said for taking the easy path too, if you can find the easy path. So
And
I would
that's-
be open to the collective's thinking on that, but that's my thinking. What do y'all think?
Yeah, that's super helpful. I agree. I think the more diversity we could have actually in the sample, the better off the recommendations would be, because if across urban, rural, progressive, more conservative, innovators versus not, if we see there are some common themes throughout, then to your point, if this is national strategy, I think that has a better chance of moving forward. So I'm glad to hear you say that and would support that approach. I know in our state, we have all of the above, so we could probably find some good partners to work with, at least in some of those contexts.
Can I ask the question?
Yes.
So it sounds very intriguing. Look forward to fleshing it out. My question is, are you envisioning that every partner on the team collects data and establishes some data portal, and then works with the local EDD to use those data to develop a CEDS? And finally, is that on top of the existing commitments to the agenda for the EDA centers, or is this to be embedded in that?
I'm not envisioning. I think where we have partners, other UCs, and I know Purdue has done this for the Midwestern region, and I think Kansas has played some leadership roles in the West, Midwest, where they've already created the portals. We don't need to create new data sets. And I don't know if you all saw what InPlan just reproduced today. Have any of you used InPlan? It's a data portal, primarily for input-output analysis. They've just added environmental parameters on it. So I would say where we can use existing data sets, we help our EDDs connect to them. You don't actually have to create it in your university center if you don't already have it there, or if there are other portals that you can link them to, use it. One of the other portals that we've thought about, and actually one that we actually did a little thinking on, I know most of the states that are represented here have United Way ALICE reports. If you think about economic equity, which is one of the challenges we want to try to address, data sets on that can be very varied at the local and regional level. Some of our states have partnered with their United Way agencies in what are called ALICE reports. I don't know if any of you are familiar. Asset limited income constrained families, where they at a county level in your state will have identified, living wages and challenges that working poor people face. And that's a data set we thought could be easily incorporated in many of the EDDs. And we can send you a link to these so that you can take a look at these reports if you're not familiar with them. But I think the intent would not be to expect your university center to have to create this. If you can find it elsewhere and help your EDDs put it together in a reliable way. There might be some data sets like issues of poverty and environmental quality that we might have to struggle with. But I think in general, we try to use secondary data wherever available. That's my thinking on it. What
So
others?
you don't intend to have a uniform template or set of data that all the participants would use. It's each their own.
I think something around the Rayworth model would be the template. Now, obviously, some of those things like ocean acidification don't work for some of us. We might find other variables that would be equally important, like water quality or water quantity. So I think we would use that as our basic template, but we would modify it as appropriate for your EDD and your state, because we're all sort of playing in a different setting. And I think we want to, I'm inclined to suggest we provide for that variability. But, you know,
Rex, would
then-
one of the objectives of this be to develop a template or some guidance for how regions could do the CEDS Plus process? You know,
Yes.
independent of it being a requirement, it doesn't seem like it would be outside what the CFRs require for CEDS already.
Mhm.
The other thought I had was, and Josh, you can feel free to comment on this, but in Oregon, it would be interesting for us just to collect some information on how the 12 districts react to this idea. And you know, I think that would be an interesting set of data in itself, just to kind of get a handle on where they're at. I think we have worked with enough of them to have a pretty good idea where they're at. I think one of the biggest things that we would find is capacity constraints, and people just complain about, you know, we already don't get enough money to do our CEDS, and now you're asking us to do all this other work with it.
Yep. Let me sort of throw out some of that. Absolutely. And we hear that from our districts as well. We hear it from our university center as well. Depending on what funding source we go after, and I've been chatting with our regional director, Susan Brem, about this. And our initial thought was that community of practice challenge, which is a range of 2 to 6 million. What I'm hearing, I mean, this is all new stuff, right? EDA doesn't know exactly. She says we ought to try. But they're thinking they want national scale. Obviously, we're a pilot project, less than national, but if we're successful with national impact. So, you know, we're not totally out of the ballpark, but that would be one of the funding sources. The other one they're looking at is the National Technical Assistance Program, which is a smaller amount of funding. Now, if we go for and our initial intent is to go for the big one, the Communities of Practice Challenge. You know, each of the university centers, we would, you know, allocate, we would 100,000 a year. They each, we talk 2 years, 100,000 a year to the university centers. That would include all your operation, your F&A, and all your indirect costs. So that's your, and then that would be for the 24-month initiative. And then with the EDDs, looking at a $75K award for the partners that we select. So that'd be another 150 if we each do 2 of them. That'd be for an 18-month period, approximately. There'd be some overlap. Year 1 would be pretty much the first 2/3 of the project would be our working together and developing our capacity to provide the training and technical assistance that we think the EDDs might need to both gather the data and develop their advisory committee, help them, you know, recruit the EDDs that we would partner with. And then once we've got them on board, work with them on creating their CEDS document, and then working with their advisory committee to internalize the data and come to their final CEDS recommendations. And then we spend some time analyzing what those are. So
Dr. Lamore,
yeah.
if you go back one slide, they can then see the breakdown of this month by month,
Thanks.
which might be helpful.
So this slide sort of lays out what we've envisioned the scope of work to be. And I just pretty much gave you the narrative of it. The numbers would look at, and again, this depends on the funding source. We may end up with a smaller pie to work with, so I don't. But Josh, responding to your observation, you know, the EDDs feel pressured. We all are busy. You know, for us to do this to the way I think we'd all want to do it, we're going to have to find the resources. You know, and we were thinking 100K to each of the UCs per year, and then 75K to the EDDs for that 18-month period to help fund their, in addition to what they already get to do, their CEDS. And then hopefully that would be, EDA would see that as a valued investment. And then it would be enough to carry us through this project to find out if it works or not. So that's kind of what we're thinking. We may have to pare that down. Some of you may decide, I don't want anything to do with these crazies. They're trying to over, and so we may have a fewer set of UCs and EDDs, or we may have a smaller funding pool that we can draw from. The national TA pool is, somewhere around $1 million a year is what they allow up to. So that would be smaller.
So Rex, would you be thinking about getting a partner in each of the EDA regions?
We thought about that. We
Uh,
actually stuck with the northern tier.
okay, all right. Because I was at the UEDA summit last week, or I guess it was last week or so in Savannah, and I did sit down with Bernadette Grafton, who heads the UC program, because I was talking to her about the Community of Practice Awards that's coming out with the ARPA. But that something has to be in by, I think, October 31st.
Right, end of the month.
So that's a bit. So have you talked to her actually about this idea, or just your regional person? I would recommend that if people are on board, that the sooner you talk to Bernadette, the better on this. But my understanding from her is that they would be looking for something that would have a national scope.
Right.
And something deliverable that EDA then could use for its own purpose. So I would think, it would just be good for her to know. She might have other ideas of where you could look for funding, because we had a project we thought we would go under this, but we thought it fit better under under a different area, because this is a very short turnaround for you to be pulling this together. But I think the idea that you would give the EDDs funding because in essence, you're asking them to do another CEDS, and like we might be finding a partner that just completed a CEDS, and they just might not want to do it. So it could be harder than we think.
Agree.
To find those partners.
Agreed.
Anyway.
Jenna, remind me, where's Bernadette? Is she with UEDA or is she with?
She's the EDA DC headquarters person. She's in charge of all the UC programs. So
Okay.
so Bernadette Grafton, and but she is also the person that for the community of practices for the ARPA money, stuff goes through her for that.
Okay.
So that's why I'm just thinking that you would want to talk and run this concept by her. I'm just concerned about, the bandwidth of pulling something like this together by the end of the month.
No, I appreciate that. I don't think it'd be, they only want 12 pages of narrative.
Okay.
I mean, and if we do memorandums of agreement with you, and you would, this is kind of the scope of work that you would agree to in general.
Yeah, so in general, you would just be seeking these MOUs from us, and you'd be writing the proposal and all the other stuff, right? So
correct.
Would we have to do our own budgets that we'd have to get by our research people?
Yes, I'm inclined to let you do all that.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'd have to do all that.
Would we need that level of formality just for the proposal, or if you had letters of support from us, would that work? And then we do the MOUs if obligated?
MOU could be hard to get through our legal people that fast.
That sounds like a reasonable compromise. I like that thinking. Yes, I hear what you're saying. So we might be able to just do letters of support, commitment that were letters of intent. Let's call them letters of intent,
Right.
where we would intend to collaborate with you on this scope of work if the funding is available at the level that's requested. And again, I hear what you're saying, Gina. That's the kind of feedback I'm getting from Susan, our regional director in Chicago, that they're looking for national scope, which, yeah, okay. That sounds to me, well, anyway, we might be able to fit in there. Obviously, we have national impact. There is national impact if we help transform the CEDS. So I don't think the impact is the issue, it's national scope.
Right.
And yeah, go ahead.
And didn't they just update a new CEDS process or things they were looking at? How is that less than 5 years old?
Yeah, it's less than that. And it's just, they've added issues of economic
Right,
and
right.
resiliency, as Josh mentioned, or Bob mentioned.
But there definitely, one thing she did mention too is anything would need to have equity and inclusion in it.
Yeah.
And this is a whole new way of thinking about it. And so that seems like you're right up the alley, the direction they want to be going.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
think it's an important point, Gina, and so I think that struggle that I would have if I were in your seat, Rex, is having a coalition of the willing versus trying to get people signed up. And given the time frame of having to put this proposal together, I think having willing partners who are willing to sign on to this and commit to it is the path of least resistance. I think your suggestion about how you get around that and have national impact, the guidance, I think, is one way to do that, to say, here's how you can do a CEDS Plus independent. There might be a white paper, a policy paper that comes out that makes a set of recommendations about amendments to the Code of Federal Regulations that govern how they do CEDS. So that might be another piece of this. And then there might be some outreach tools or some trainings or webinars or something that could go on around this. And this all aligns, it feels like, with the current administration's trajectory on this. So I feel like there's a way to spin it to make it competitive, but the suggestion about talking to Bernadette about this, I think, is essential to just vet it through her. And I found her to be very very candid about her thoughts and available. So
I like that. I'm with you. And I totally, Bob, the idea of the coalition willing, I mean, God, we got enough challenges. Let's try to do something together. We all, the fish are swimming in the same direction. It's going to be enough impediments to get to an outcome anyway. So I'm all with that. And you know what, I'll try to set up a time with Bernadette ASAP. I'm going to, again, I want to approach this as a collective. We're willing to take the lead on the administrative, at least the first round of it anyway. And then, see if we can get a conference call up with her and we can all kind of chime in and let her know how we feel, if you're available and if you're willing. But as the outcomes, when we get done with this, you're all going to be well informed on what it takes to go from the current CEDS model to a CEDS Plus model. And, let 1,000 flowers bloom, because for this kind of transformation to occur in the economic development community, we're going to need as many informed and committed partners as we can create. We are pushing against a heavy lift here. And so, y'all are going to find opportunities to articulate your experience, the lessons you learned. You're going to have partners that are going to have hopefully good stories to tell. You may have some not so good stories to tell, but this is what we need. We need a lot of voices saying, we got to think differently. We got to do differently about how we create a more sustainable economic development strategy and an economically and environmentally just one. We got to get beyond the saying to the doing. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah, I was gonna say that'd be an important component for us. I mean, I think I can speak for Bob and I'd say U of O is very, very interested in this. We've just completed work with the district that our university actually sits within in terms of updating their CEDS and tried to push the envelope. I think, as you all know, we can create CEDS plus plans as well. But the real success factor is whether or not the districts are actually going to do anything with it too. So the
Right.
extent to which implementation is a component of this as well. I know that would be, I mean, that's the big lesson for us coming out of the last 2 rounds of CEDS update. Again, we've done for our district. Great ideas, solid action strategies, good approach. Their ability to follow through and implement has been challenged. And so I think that's another element of this, at least for me, is, and I don't know the extent to which that's EDA and more EDA support, or if it's really just like the districts thinking about themselves in different ways, or so, I don't know what that is, but that'd be something I would love to speak with all of you about and learn from. And if we can get enough examples from different parts of the nation where it is actually working, that would be helpful, I know, for us.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jan.
So I was just going to say, when we talked to our regional economic districts here, water was a big deal for our Western districts. And so when we built our dashboard, we actually have information about water restrictions in Kansas law on who controls the surface and groundwater. Now, maybe Jenna knows, have any of our districts utilized that in their CEDS updates recently? I haven't seen the newest CEDS
I haven't
reports.
looked at them. No.
It'd be interesting to know if our districts are incorporating that information that they indicated to us was very important to them.
Interesting that you mentioned that, Zan. I mentioned Implan, another data provider that's a private group. I don't know if folks use it, but they just sent out an email yesterday and they've included environmental variables, and it was water. And they actually used a case in Buffalo where a company wanted to expand. They were going to increase their water demand, and they needed to get local government permission to do that. And again, this is where these environmental parameters bump into the economic developers. And so it's a consideration that communities need to obviously take seriously.
Yeah.
Good example. So I pretty much walked through the agenda with you. It wasn't in the order we anticipated, but that is not important. So what other thoughts do you have about this?
If I may, I think getting back to Josh's point about following up about how do we evaluate the implementation aspect of this whole process. I think me and Dr. Lamore have talked about that possibly being some kind of follow-up, potentially. Obviously, nothing is in stone, but some kind of follow-up work maybe that could be done in terms of gauging whether the implementation is similar to what they said they were going to take action on in the CEDS Plus document.
I think as an evaluator myself, I just wanted to say, I think any component that you should be also adding, I know the pre and post and the CEDS Plus can tell the story, but think about other possible impact measures that you already will be collecting. Just the advisory board itself and how that dynamic goes about, that could be an important component, if you will, metric to capture as you tell that story, right? At the end, how impactful that CEDS Plus is. So just think about possible indicators that might also be, that might add to the value of this project. So.
Rex, my apologies. I'm going to have to run to another meeting, but I think you're really onto something here, and I would like to continue the dialogue.
Thanks, Wally. So here's what we're thinking. We got to get we got to get a better focus on, are we going after the community of practice, or are we going to go after something else? And as Jenna pointed out, communities of practice is due at the end of October. I think we keep it simple. We do it straightforward. We get it in the hopper. We do letters of intent. We do a budget that's, fairly straightforward, and contracting with our sister UCs and in our EDDs in a very direct way. I mean, keep it simple, get it on the table. So I think we can try to pull it together. We're going to try to pull that proposal together. Think about it over the weekend. I always like folks to think about, if we go this path, are you in with us? And then, there might be bumps in the road, so we accept that. And then we'll send around the PowerPoint, we'll send around the video. You can share it with your colleagues. Let us know early next week if you're in for the concept. We'll begin writing the narrative, working up the budget. I'll get more feedback from EDA and you can talk to your people too, talk to your EDA regional folks, and tell them you're thinking about joining in this, network, see what kind of reaction you get from them. It'd be great if we had 3 or 4 regional directors telling Washington this is the way to go. And then Washington might actually listen. And then we can shoot for the end of the month. So how's that sound for next steps? Is that okay? Let us know early next week. You're in, at least for the proposal. And you can always bail when we get a contract. Y'all know EDA. It'll be retroactive, of course.
That would be one of my concerns, that they're a little overwhelmed right now, and the 24 months timeline is actually feels a little constraining to me on this. It's a pretty big initiative, I think, and I think there's so much opportunity here to really reshape the way EDA thinks and goes about doing these plans. And for our part, I think, Josh, we would want to think about how we make CEDS more relevant to the regions and to the players within the regions. So I think this is, as Josh said, this is a crusade I think we're willing to go with you on. So
Thanks.
I think it's, we've been talking about this kind of stuff for a long time. To have a group of UCs that are pursuing this, there's just strength in numbers, and I think you've assembled a great group here, and I'm really excited about this. So, and Josh, we can talk with our SPS people about what the options are in terms of, do we need to go through proposal review and whatnot, and then create a budget. But 30 days is not a problem for us, at least in getting proposal approval.
Yeah. We might need a paragraph or 2 from each of you about your university center, so that we have, when they ask about capability, we're leading with our strengths, of course. So that's the kind of stuff we would want you to help us plug into the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I will let's go ahead in good faith. Again, chat with your people, chat with your EDRs, your regional directors. Tell them you're thinking about helping in this regard. See what kind of reaction you get. Give feedback to Ms. Gilbert, myself, and then we'll try to pull together another conversation sometime next week, if possible, sooner than later. And give it updates on what we've learned and where we're heading. And I'm hoping that by next week, we'll have a better pin on which funding source we're going to head for. If it is the community of practice. And as I mentioned, maybe I try to get a conference call with Bernadette on that, so that she can hear from a few of us about why we think this might be important. And then kind of get her reaction as well. That probably would be a good thing to get done next week.
Cool.
Okay.
Jenna and Zan and I will chat later today, and we'll talk again, Rex, next Monday.
Thanks, Wally. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, everyone. If, does anyone else have anything for our common good? Be safe.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Yep.
Yeah,
thank
thanks
you.
for pulling us
Bye.
together, Rex.
Most
Thanks
appreciated.
for your work on this.
Yep,
Yeah,
you're
thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Dr. Lamore.
Yeah, you can end your recording.
Okay.